I couldn't help musing on how these stories have affected me and how you deliberately, it seemed, set up a sort of very conscious process to win your reader over with quite a heartfelt plea to pay attention to these bigger concerns, I guess. You know, there's, for example, they're very audacious. There's a danger in lots of the stories that the kind of thing that happens in the story could degenerate into something predictable or something cliched, and yet you pull it off. It works. And it makes me like the work even more because you've taken those risks, as you said, not done the safe, competent thing, but actually pushed it to somewhere where it just becomes an exercise in sort of in making the thing that has to happen, regardless of that it might, you know, be a bit of a tightrope walk, I suppose, for the author. And so it was like someone who plays a really good hand of cards, I have to tell you. Here they come. Yes, here come these cards, one at a time, down on the table, and I realised you were just very precisely in control of that whole game, as I have read the stories again and again. And eventually the whole collection, if there is a unifying force, began to strike me as a kind of that very well played, masterfully played actually, high-risk game, right down to, I have to say, the final story, which it's almost like a trump card for the whole collection, particularly because of that playful way you set up in the first story, that thing of, ethnic literature, it's very hot and very important, you know. You should be writing about your kind of cultural background, your experience as a Vietnamese person, and so do this thing, write about hardship, and that's going to really get... And you say in the story, or the character says in the story, no, I'm going to be writing about, you know, ageing New York artists, I'm going to be writing about this and you know, lesbian vampires. Alas, there wasn't a lesbian vampire story.
Didn't make the cut, unfortunately.
And yet, at the end of the collection, it's almost like you're saying, here's the trump card. You want a story which is going to kind of pull this amazing heartstring. Here it is. Here's this story. And I found that final story almost impossibly moving to read. It was unbearably powerful, I found it. And it just made me think of someone who is holding a fantastic hand there. And you play those cards beautifully. So it did strike me that there's that kind of terrific bravado in taking those risks. And in fact, the verities that you mentioned in that first story, of course, which are love and honour and pity and pride and compassion and sacrifice, it made me wonder whether in striving for those things in the stories, to deal with those things, those big human concerns, those big pleas, do you find yourself thinking about technique at all, or is it just all about making that connection with that subject matter with your reader?
Always thinking about technique, and always trying to not think about technique.
Yeah.
That's one of the tensions.
What is zen of you?
I'll tell you what's zen is, I actually was in Vegas a couple of weeks ago when Nan Lee was there playing the World Series of Poker. And I thought there was going to be some sort of cosmic implosion at one point. Because I've watched him play and he's played good. So I'm quite happy to be mistaken for him. He's doing okay for himself.
That's right.
He's good looking too. I don't know, I really enjoy that sense that you were talking about of, you know, really entreating, I guess, the reader, because that's something which is really important to me, the idea of extending a courtesy or an invitation to the reader, and to not have the work be so self-indulgent or wrapped up in itself, and to always give justification for the reader to keep on going. You know,
well, you've said it's like you see every line as a possibility or a danger, I think you said, or a chance to lose a reader.
Absolutely.
And you look at every line
to
make sure that they're still with you and they're still staying in there with you. So it's such
that's the paranoia, I guess.
You know,
is this the one? Is this the word that's going to push someone out? Is that the sentence? And every reader has their own, you know, buttons, and so you can't really think about that. I guess, I mean, like all of us, I guess, I like to have my cake and eat it too. You know, I like to show that the work is aware of the assumptions and expectations that people bring to it. And so with that last story, for example, there's always going to be that infrastructure that's built around the idea of ethnic stories, or the idea that someone who looks a certain way or has a certain name or a certain background is going to write about a certain thing. And that's not something which you can really ignore as a writer or a reader, I don't think. I don't think it's ideal that it should be that way, but that's the way it is. You title a story Hiroshima, then there's a whole body of extant knowledge and assumption that's brought into people's apprehension of that story. And so it's on the one hand, it's extraordinarily tempting and easy to sort of make your work and yourself straddle these aporias and straddle these uncertainties and not really take a stand. It's very easy to sort of stand back and just say, well, okay, this is not really possible, that's not really possible. Everything is contextualised, the reader takes their own subjective experience away from the work. And even were I to go for something which I think is sort of, that stands as good, or were I to valorise something that I've read as just indisputably good, that's always contestable. And so I like to, use the other side of the coin as well, in a sense, and say, well, okay, if you're so scared of, for example, being melodramatic, or if you're so scared of your work veering into sentimentality, then you risk losing sentiment altogether, don't you? And if you're so scared that people are going to read your story about Vietnamese boat people and say, well, obviously there's an element of exploitation and cynicism and market manipulation in that, then you risk losing that material which might be the most charged and the most profoundly moving to you.
You let that cynicism cripple you.
That's right, yeah. And so it seems to me, it's not even a fine line, it's sort of two lines that you have to straddle, where on the one hand you sort of, make it quite obvious that you're aware of these things and that you're conversant with the environment in which you're working. And at the same time, you just need to shut that out and to tell the story as best you possibly can, and just hope that individual readers, not so much cultural critical communities, but individual readers will just come to that work and respond and say, hey, that moved me too.
It doesn't really exist outside that relationship, does it?
I don't think so, no. And I think that's why the sort of that interchange between writer and reader, that idea of creating a space where the reader can come in and give of themselves, into that dynamic, but have the words be such that they are galvanised in a certain way, in a certain direction. I think that's the key relationship. That's it.
And one that would preoccupy a writer for the rest of their lives, by the sounds of it. So
right, yeah.
It makes it. I'm imagining that we're not going to hear from you now for a little while, and then there's something else that's going to spring up out of the ether. That's the next thing you're going to do.
My publisher's here, so I take the fifth on that one. Refuse to incriminate myself.
Have you got that kind of second book nerves feeling already, or is it just you're just basking in the fact that this one's out and happening and working the way you want it?
Yeah, the amazing thing about this book is that it's a collection of short stories, and so the expectations out there for this book were pretty much negligible, and it's a wonderful thing that any sort of thing that any good review or any sort of positive thing that the book actually achieves is just gravy, and so I feel tremendously excited. I started out in fiction writing a novel that I subsequently chucked away, and right now I'm working on another novel, and I'm really excited to get my teeth into it.
Wow. It's great to feel so positive rather than just shattered with nerves at the desk, wondering how you can follow up and act like this act.
I think one
making you nervous or anything.
No, yeah, cheers, thanks a lot. Now, one of the good things about writing a book that is just, again, just all over the shop and so many different styles and so many subject matters and settings is that no one really knows what to expect next. And so I don't really feel a pressure to, create any particular type of work at all. And the only pressure is the one that, is driving the work and the one that's coming from me mainly.
Do you feel you're a sort of hypercritical sort of judge of your own work?
I am, yeah, absolutely.
So you're your best editor?
I don't think I'm my best editor, no. I mean, I sort of veer between, I always think that I am at heart an indulgent writer. I always think that at heart I'm a lyrical writer and not so much concerned with narrative and structure and movement of that type. And so I probably tend to overcompensate and think too much about my weaknesses in structure or narrative drive or momentum and things like that. And I probably am too harsh on myself in some ways when it comes to the more flowery, ornate excesses that I'm naturally drawn to. And so it's always that.
Maybe that's that little 8 or 9-year-old poet in there fighting.
With really flowery Keats rip-offs.
Well, speaking of lyricism, I was wondering if I could ask you to read something for us.
Sure, yeah.
That'd be great. It's always a bit of a treat, isn't it, to hear an author read from their own work, especially when you haven't heard your own voice telling us some of these stories in this beautiful prose. And then also it's part of this thing we've been talking about with taking on material that could be risky, that could degenerate into something that's predictable or cliched, and yet, once again, somehow, I think that lyricism, you're being a bit harsh on yourself, I think that lyricism is so evidently there, and it does rise to the surface like a sort of a beautiful, I don't know what, ether. It's lovely. And in this particular thing I want to ask you to read, if it's all right, it's another passage in a story where it could have gone really wrong. It's a story called Meeting Elise about an ageing New York visual artist, and I have to say that the detail about him being a visual artist is, it's hard to believe you're not a visual artist. That's beautifully written. But he's had a night of indignities, I guess you'd say, and the biggest one is that he's facing his own death, his own mortality. His lover and muse, Olivia, has died before him, and he's been given a diagnosis of colon cancer, so he knows what he's facing. And now his 18-year-old daughter, who is a cellist, who he's been estranged from all her life, has kind of snubbed him. And you think, where is this narrative of exploration going to go? And somehow you take us to an epiphany about mortality that goes on that tightrope and just manages so beautifully and so movingly to show us what happens to a character like that, that I just love this particular piece of writing. So if you wouldn't mind reading,
Cheers.
That'd be fantastic.
Here's what I'll do. Look at myself in the mirror. My face stark white, a shock of bone and skin and hair. My teeth yellow, carious. The valves of my body corroded. Get your clothes on and get working. The order of the day then. Get dressed. She's coming today. Something swanky, maybe the white tie suit. The satin peak lapel, besom pockets with a white piqué vest. I pad my underwear with Kleenex to catch the blood. Outside, it's still raining. I skate the sidewalk, finding my way by the light of office buildings. The street's vacant, dark as a lung. When the wind is up, it sounds like the trees talk to each other above the noise of the crowd. I'm late. The performance has already started. In fact, it's almost over. The ticket clerk repeats this before he trots out his supervisor. I tell them who I am. There's a buzzing in my head, the sound of a fluorescent tube as we argue, and then, finally, I have it in my hand, my ticket. Side balcony, the signs leading up and up. The carpet is red-plaided and oil-darkened and feels like freshly mown grass, each step sinking in a bit. My footsteps leave damp craters. Music, all the while, audible from behind the neoclassically relieved walls, floating to me as though from a distant boat. The stairs get steeper. I imagine I can hear it, her centuries-old cello. By the time I reach the top, my legs feel weak, hollowed out, flush with hot bath water and whiskey. My cummerbund is up underneath my nipples, my collar like wet cardboard, every seam in my shirt stamping itself into my skin, sweat spurting out of every furrow. Sir, the guilt-brocaded usher begins, but I stare him down. I recover my breath. Then, slowly, I lean open the heavy door. The sound sudden, heart-flooding. She's on stage, the four of them forming an almost closed circle, playing as though only to each other. The people in my row half rise, half brace, anything to avoid touching me as I sidle to my seat. My ass smarts when I sit down. There's a buttress blocking half of my face. I imagine the leech in the front row, the hatchet silhouette of his head, his gangly legs all stretched out. It doesn't matter though. I can still hear her, the sound of her cello, full, sonorous, rising through my body and slowly transmuting the pain into warmth, the carry of it through the auditorium, and it's as though my body is without substance and I'm dissolving into the sound she scratches out of her contraption of wood and steel and hair. The concert hall, the space inside my skull. Rain and sweat puddle the floor at my feet. It's getting hot. The music goes on in its slow, gorgeous, devastating burn. When I lean over for a better view, my neighbour recoils, initiating a long sequence of public sighing. Now I see her, my Elise. Her head remains still, her bowing neat, precise. Her hair gleams burn white and black under the spotlight. She's floating out there on a skiff of flight, my daughter, my baby girl. A severe beauty all the way through her. My heart hitches underneath its tight cummerbund. I see her. She has everything she needs. She has wrung all my weaknesses out of her strong, straight body. Get up. I get up. Lighten myself, brittle, unable to hear, hold anymore. I breast, woozily, the row of half-risen knees. On the hallway stairs, the applause starts up. It sounds like rain. Then, amazingly, there are shouts, stamping feet. I leave the building and go outside. Into the brindled rain, the rain become iridescent, into the steel lamp night, above the world's dead weight. It's raining outside. I catch my breath and watch as the crowd comes out. She's coming out. She'll be out any second now. Then I see her, in the walk of a young boy, in the languor of a 20-year-old. Uncommon economy for someone so young. No, there, at 50, on a billboard, heartbreakingly beautiful and advertising the power of business solutions. Eyes grey, smile gas blue, a deeper run of colours in her cheekbones. No, the darkness through rain is deceptive. The crowd empties out of the theatre like a last exhalation. I count her as she passes. It's raining. There she is, stooped and somehow swan-like, waiting under the corner streetlight. The light drawn into her skin, soaking it, making it refulgent in the black mine of city. A serious young girl, wind splaying her dark hair. No, I never had a shot, not really. Move, out of breath, toward that shore of light. Catch her, and she'll smile, teeth showing. Draw it for me, this matter of memory, word by word. Dirty old man. Wait up, Olivia, I'm coming. I see you now. Are you ready? Wait up for me.
Cheers.